Hello and welcome to Spencer's Library. I hope you can all hear me. This is my today's live stream Q&A. It's always weird to start these things because I'm never quite sure if I'm actually live or not, if I'm just sitting here talking to my laptop or if there's actually people able to hear and see this. So basically yesterday I put out a call for questions on my YouTube channel and I've had quite a few. But if there's anything else that you want to ask, then of course you can just post them in the chat. I'm keeping an eye on the chat, as is Bill. So you can say hello to Bill. And I'll try to answer any questions that are put to me. Before we get into the questions, though, I just wanted to quickly mention cushions, because it seems like I have stirred a minor controversy yesterday when I said that cushions are pointless. And many of you then told me that actually cushions are really useful for short people. Now, what you might not be able to tell from seeing me, sitting at my desk, is that I am a short person. I am really, really very short. In meters, I'm 1.50 meters, which in your old imperial feet is 5, just under 5 of those. So I'm under 5 foot tall, and yet I've never actually used cushions to make sofas more comfortable. And I think that's partly because I have found other mechanisms for making sofas more comfortable, mostly that I tend to sit with my legs up on the sofa, or I tend to sit really far forwards on the edge. But thank you. I might actually give cushions a try now. We already have one question in the chat, which is, what do you think of the Bible? I don't really have any thoughts on the Bible. I read it once a long time ago. And spiritual books. No, I'm not a very spiritual person, Robin. So unfortunately, I haven't really got much of an opinion on spiritual books. There's a few people in the chat already. So hello, Annalisa, Jacqueline, Cappuccino Crafts, and Robin. And of course, Bill, who, as I said already, is monitoring the chat, making sure that any rude people are immediately chucked out of this chat. So I say we just get into the questions that were put to me yesterday. I'm going to read them out and then try and answer them. The first question is from Logan, who says, "Want to be friends?" Sure. Yeah, we can be friends, Logan. Then the next question, I'm just scrolling through a whole lot of opinions on cushions to get to the next question. Ooh. Lyrophilia asks, I'm surprised that you're relocating to Germany. How come? And does your husband speak any German or intend to learn it in Germany? So if you don't know, I'm currently living in Wales, but I am originally from Germany. So the plan was always for me and Bill to move back to Germany. And I say move back to Germany because Bill has previously also lived in Germany. Between 2012 and 2014, we lived in Germany together, and then we decided to move to the UK. But we always meant to move back eventually. And what has accelerated that process is Brexit. So I'm not going to bore you with my very extensive and angry political opinions about Brexit, or you'll find plenty of videos about that on my channel. But essentially, because of the new immigration rules, I have to apply for something called settled status in order to continue living here beyond the end of this year. For various reasons, I'm not applying for settled status, which means that if I remain after December 2020, I will be an illegal immigrant. So Bill and I have decided to move to Germany this year, and we are hoping that we can get this done. Obviously, the whole situation with COVID is making it a lot more difficult, but that is still essentially the goal. And as for the question of whether Bill speaks German, in the chat he answered the question himself, saying leider nicht, but he does speak enough German to talk to my mum. It's obviously a question of practice. I think as soon as he spends a bit longer in German, he's going to be pretty fluent again, like he was before. Let's just check in with the chat. Hello, the Bookfinch. Hello, Martha. Martha actually asked, have you ever read anything from Brazil? I have not. So do you have any particular recommendations for me? Obviously, books that have been translated into English or German, either of them, because I don't speak any Portuguese. But I'm ashamed to say I couldn't even name a Brazilian author that I've heard of. So I'd be grateful for any recommendations from you, Martha. Bill also mentions in the chat that he loses the right to work in Germany from 2020. Yes, there is also that issue. Brexit basically makes migration between the UK and the European Union a lot more difficult after 2020. Jacqueline asks, which booktubers do you subscribe to and any recommendations? So I'm subscribed to, I believe, over 200 booktubers. And I could probably fill this entire chat with recommendations for those. But I'm going to name a few of the, I guess, the smaller ones. Out of the larger booktubers, I think I subscribe to most of the ones that talk about classics, such as Lucy the Reader and Books and Things. But I really enjoy Infinite Text, which is run by a Canadian lady named Andrea, who has become my booktube friend, and she is really interesting in the videos that she does, the books that she talks about, and she's also really funny. I also, there's so many booktubers that I like. I'm just going to have a look through my subscription feed to see. Okay, so Taking Tea with Catherine is a booktuber that I have been following since she started her channel, which I believe was last year. Also, Marissa, what is her channel called? Blatantly Bookish, love her. A lot of British booktubers as well. She is not posting as much these days, but there is actually a booktuber from around where I live, and her name is Linos. I think her channel is also now just her full name, but she used to be booktubing under the Lilac Linnet. You can also actually, if you go back to some of my wrap-ups that I used to do, I have a lot of small booktuber recommendations in those, and I've done a few separate videos about small booktuber recommendations as well. Fully Booked asked in the chat, an author you think is underrated or perhaps just not widely talked about. Now, I know I bang on about this a lot, but I think a really underrated classics author is E.M. Forster. I think his books would appeal to a lot of people who enjoy Virginia Woolf and other kind of early 20th century classics, because he writes that sort of turn of the century kind of feeling very, very beautifully. So I think he's an author that should be talked about more on BookTube specifically. Jacqueline says, you're one of only 5 I've subscribed to. Jacqueline, there are so many fantastic booktubers, and once you go down the rabbit hole, it's really hard to crawl out again. Let's move on with some questions from the video. So Amy Wolf asks, excluding any works by E.M. Forster, what would your top 5 books of recent years be? I can't mention just 5 books of recent years. So I'm just trying to think back to the most recent of recent years, which is this year, and tell you about which books I enjoyed from this year. My favorite book so far that I read this year, and it's definitely going to make it into the top 5 of this year, I would say, is Fingersmith by Sarah Waters. It just blew me away. It's a fantastic historical novel. I know I'm like 15 years late to the party because it came out in 2003 and was immediately successful and very hyped. But the hype is worth it with that one. If you enjoy historical fiction, this is just a fantastic Victorian historical novel. I even gave it to Bill to read, and he doesn't read that much, but he enjoyed it too. Otherwise, I've been enjoying some dystopian fiction. There's one young adult dystopian series which I enjoyed the beginning of, and the first novel of that series is called Life as We Knew It by Susan Beth Pfeffer. It's a post-apocalyptic novel set in a world where the moon is knocked closer to the earth, which brings everything into imbalance. What else have I enjoyed this year? Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel, I've enjoyed as well this year. So I guess those are the kind of the three books that really stand out for me from my reading this year. Oh, also John Wyndham, The Kraken Wakes. That was another favorite that I read, which is a fantastic mid-century post-apocalyptic alien invasion story. If you enjoyed The Day of the Triffids, you're going to love this one as well. Let's check back with the chat. Teresa asks, how did you and Bill meet and how long have you been married? How long were you married is kind of a funny question because we were both convinced that last month we had our 5th wedding anniversary. So just casually, I mentioned in the chat to my mum that, hey, it's our 5th wedding anniversary today. And she looked at me and said, no, that's next month. Did you forget your wedding anniversary? So that happened. So at some point later this month, we will be married for 5 years. We don't really keep up with the anniversary, as you can tell. In fact, last year we only noticed that it was about the time for our anniversary because we got a card from Bill's mum saying happy anniversary. So we've been married for 5 years and we have been together for 10 years, almost 10 years. We met at a songwriters meetup in London because both Bill and I used to write songs. He still does occasionally. I have given up on that. Autumn asks, did you grow up in Germany or the UK? I grew up in Germany. I only moved to the UK in 2014. Angela asks, could you suggest any books, classic or not, that have some humor in it? I could use a laugh. I love classics, but some of them are so depressing. I really like Oscar Wilde's comedies. I know they are stage plays rather than novels, but I find them really funny as well. If you don't like to read stage plays, then I would recommend The Canterville Ghost by Oscar Wilde as well. That's a short story which starts off quite funny and then goes into a bit of a kind of sentimental mood about a ghost who lives in an old English mansion trying really hard to impress an American family that has just moved there. So Oscar Wilde is my go-to for kind of classic comedies and funny classic stories. Auto asked, do you enjoy reading lesser known treasures more than very popular books? No, I wouldn't say so. There are certainly some more unknown or lesser known stories that I've really enjoyed where I'm surprised that they are not better known. But I'm not that well read in the sort of classic repertoire that I have to dig deep to find something that I haven't heard of before. I'm always surprised, for example, by Katie from Books and Things, who reads the most obscure novels, and because she's already read all of the mainstream ones. I like to sort of pick both really popular novels and novels that are lesser well known. I pick up an obscure novel if it interests me. For example, last year in October, I read a novel called Gloriana or the Revolution of 1900, which intrigued me because it was a futuristic novel written in 1890 about a feminist utopia. And if that doesn't appeal to any lover of Victorian literature, then I don't know what. Rick Perry says, you're not a spinster. Wow, you're really sharp, Rick. I'm not indeed a spinster, and this is not actually a library. It's hard to tell, but it's an office. Let's see what other questions there are. Oh, Martha has suggested some Brazilian books. Oh, great. I'm going to screenshot this later because I have not heard of any of these authors. So yeah, I'll definitely check those out. Thank you, Martha. Peshra asks for advice for learning English and improving your ability at reading in English literature. I'm not really the right person to ask because English is my second language too, but I found reading translations, no, sorry, I found that reading original English books that I already knew in translation really helpful. So in my case, I'm a huge fan of Harry Potter, so I read Harry Potter in German. And then when I started to learn English, I picked up the Harry Potter books in English. And because I was already familiar with them, I found it a lot easier to pick up the kind of the quirks of the language. So I suggest that you find a book that you already like in your mother tongue and then read the English version of that, maybe even alongside the translation. Fully Booked asks, what things do you miss most about Germany? Any culture shock type situations moving to UK? Yeah, loads. I always kind of assumed that Germans and Brits were very similar, but there are a lot of little intricacies that are different. One of the first things that I had to get used to when I moved to the UK was everyone asking me how I was. Because in Germany, if you ask someone, how are you? You are genuinely interested in their well-being and in their state of mind, and you can expect a lengthy answer if you ask that. But in the UK, people just say how are you as a sort of greeting, and the correct answer is fine, thanks, you. And when I moved here and strangers, people I didn't know, people I wasn't close to, started asking me how I was constantly, I got really defensive, and my initial reaction was, that's none of your business. Why do you want to know? But of course, now I'm used to that, and I'm used to the sort of British way of doing small talk, and I'm no longer quite so defensive. I am still very direct, I think, for the British sensibilities. And I noticed that a lot, for example, when I write emails to my lecturers. So a lot of my emails will say, hello, lecturer so-and-so, here is my question for you. Thanks, Claudia. And apparently what you're supposed to do in the UK is, hello, lecturer so-and-so, I hope you had a great weekend. I'm really sorry to bother you about this, but would it be possible if blah, 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 hope you're doing well. Thanks, bye. And it's just, I find it weird. I find it hard to strike the right balance. And as for things I miss most about Germany, obviously I miss my family who are also living in Germany, but I do miss German food a lot. I miss German markets. I miss German towns. Germany is really well kept compared to the UK, and it's just a joy to go outside, whether you're going to the park or the forest or the town. Everything's just neat and tidy and clean, and I like that. I also miss the Black Forest, which is the region of Germany where I'm from. I miss, just having the forest around you, the tall trees, snow in the winter. Yeah, I miss Germany a lot, and I'm really looking forward to moving back. Rick Perry says he's pretty sharp. Okay, fair enough. Let's see what other questions there are. What are your favorite German books? I find it difficult to pinpoint a sort of German favorite author, which I don't really have other than Erich Kästner, who is mostly known for his children's classics that he wrote in the first half of the 20th century. I really, really enjoy his books. So I think he should be better known outside of Germany. So if you can find a translation of Erich Kästner's work, I would recommend those. Jacqueline says, do you have a favorite Potter book? Yes, The Order of the Phoenix is my absolute favorite Harry Potter. It is the longest one. It's the one that people find really boring, but I really enjoy the politics of it. It's the book where Harry joins the resistance and where Hogwarts, the school, is politicized, and that just speaks to me. And I really, really enjoy the mood of that book. Annalisa says, I hate the how are you greeting because I don't like pretense and having to lie because usually I'm not fine. Annalisa, I know you are from the US, so I expect that it's a similar kind of deal in the US where you just say, hey, how are you as a greeting, but you're not actually expected to give an honest answer. And the Bookfinch says, as a Finnish person, the concept of small talk irks and confuses me. Yeah, same, but you do get used to it. If everyone around you does the small talk, especially since I used to work in retail here as well, where the small talk is just amped up. you kind of learn how to do it, but I'm not comfortable doing it. Cappuccino Craft says the Black Forest sounds so beautiful. It really is. I can recommend it. You know, maybe when we are all allowed to go on holiday again, definitely consider going to the Black Forest if you're coming to Germany. And Jacqueline says she's only ever been to Berlin, but loved it. Yes, I loved Berlin as well. I've been there 3 times, and it is one of my favorite cities. It's really fun. Autumn asks, what are your favorite books written in the 2000s other than Harry Potter? Right, you've called me out a little bit because I read very few books that were actually written in this century. One author that I enjoy is Kazuo Ishiguro, who, okay, he wrote in the late 20th century as well, but he's still writing. And his book, Never Let Me Go, is from the 2000s, I believe. So I'm going to name him because I don't really know that many other 21st century authors. Amy's Bookshelf says, just noticed you run a Harry Potter podcast. What inspired you to start it? So it's currently actually a bit on hold. I haven't done an episode in a really long time. The podcast is called Have a Biscuit Potter, and it is essentially me rereading Harry Potter and talking about it. Most of the episode is spent talking about the food in Harry Potter. There's nothing really specifically that inspired me to start it. I just really enjoy podcasts, and I listen to a lot of Harry Potter podcasts. So I thought it's about time for me to do one as well. But like I said, at the moment, it is on hold. I haven't done an episode in a while, but I am planning to return to it eventually. Let's move on with some questions that were posted yesterday then. Gauri Shukla asks, how do you manage PhD work along with a YouTube channel which requires extensive reading? I don't read that much for fun. I know that with Booktubers, it often looks like everyone is constantly reading 10 books a week or whatever, but I'm quite a slow reader. I'm happy if I get 1 book a week read. And I think partly that is because of my PhD, because for my PhD, I have to read a lot. I have to read a lot of primary sources mainly. At the moment, I am fighting my way through some early 19th century women's magazines, which is interesting, but at the same time, quite dull. And it means that when I finish my day of PhD, I don't always want to pick up a book. So the way of how I manage to read alongside my PhD is I just read less. I don't read as much as maybe I would be reading if I wasn't doing a PhD. And I definitely don't read as much as most other booktubers. Back to the chat. Mariana, I hope I pronounced that right, asks, any recommendations for good classics that are perfect summer readings? Have you read my mind? Because I'm going to do a video about that, probably to come out in June. But 2 classics I would mention are both by Ian Forster, and they are Where Angels Fear to Tread and A Room with a View, which are his Italian novels. So both of them are partly set in Italy, and they follow English tourists in Italy. They are really short novels. They're really fun. They kind of deal with a lot of both English and Italian stereotypes, both of which I can kind of laugh along with as someone with Italian parents who is living in the UK. I recognize a lot of those stereotypes in people today. So I would say check out those 2 novels for a nice, light, fun summer read. Teresa says, I enjoy when Bill joins you in your videos. Any plans to include him soon? I don't know. You'll have to ask Bill that. We do videos together when it makes sense for him to be in the videos, because he is not a YouTuber. He is really a reader. But occasionally I have an idea where I want to include Bill, and usually he's kind enough to indulge me and to join me in those videos. Hey, Bill, maybe we could do a video about Fingersmith because you read it as well. Catalina asks, do you like SF? Which I assume means science fiction. Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't read a lot of science fiction. I read some occasionally. I like to watch science fiction. I'm a huge fan of Doctor Who, but I don't read much of it. If you include dystopian fiction and post-apocalyptic fiction in sci-fi, I really like that genre. But as science fiction, it's kind of, I'm not opposed to it, but it's not one of my favorite genres either. Felix Arke asks, do you speak or read Italian? The answer is un pochino. I understand Italian perfectly because my family is Italian, but because I was born and grew up in Germany, I never really practiced it much other than during summer holidays when we would visit family. I don't read Italian and I don't write Italian because I didn't have any formal Italian education. Obviously, I can read Italian. Italian's quite easy to read phonetically, but I don't think I've ever written anything in Italian. One of the things I want to do at some point is actually to read a novel in Italian, just to see if I can, because my Italian is very colloquial. My Italian is very, I guess, very dialect heavy because I talk to my family who live down in Calabria, but I would say fluent in understanding, and I do all right in communicating in Italian. Autumn asks, does your PhD get tiring? Yes, yeah, it really does. And also apologize for asking so many questions. Don't apologize, Autumn. This is a Q&A. This is what we do. Let's see if there are any other questions in the chat. Bill says he pops in if there is a topic that makes sense to discuss together. But he thinks books are silly. Divorce. Then I'll be a real spinster. Rick asks, do you enjoy novels that feature themes involving progressive ideologies and intersectional feminism? So I don't pick out my novels based on ideology. I actually enjoy a lot of sort of early feminist work. So I've read A Room of One's Own by Virginia Woolf, which I really liked, and the novel I mentioned previously, which was Gloriana by Florence Dixie, I really enjoyed. For my PhD, I read a little bit of kind of early 19th century, you can't really call them feminist texts, but kind of texts that discuss gender, such as Mary Wollstonecraft, Maria Edgeworth, but I don't pick my fiction reading based on whether it's feminist or not. Pishra asks, what is your field? My field is, I should know that, historical musicology. So music, the history of music. Specifically, I'm looking at domestic music in the early 19th century in Britain. And Muka Hate Angry Humans asks, how are you? I'm good, thanks. I'm enjoying this chat and this live video. Cappuccino Grass asks, how much longer do you expect your PhD to take? So my hand-in date is 2026 because I'm doing the PhD part-time. I'm hoping that I'll submit a few years earlier, but it's really impossible to tell. It's hard to judge how long it's going to take when you're doing primary research like that, because even though you can have, your 5-year plan, it's very unlikely that the PhD is actually going to go according to plan. I'm only 2.5 years into it, so I've still got a lot of research ahead. Teresa says, what do the two of you do for fun pre-COVID? I'm assuming that means Bill and me. We play Magic, Magic the Gathering. It's a collecting card game, and Bill definitely plays more of it than I do, but we do enjoy going to tournaments occasionally. You say pre-COVID like I normally leave the house. There isn't really much else that we kind of do together that is outside of the house other than playing Magic against other people occasionally. We both kind of have a similar taste in media, so we when we watch television or well, mostly TV, because we don't really watch films that much. We usually find something that we both enjoy, and we do. So Bill likes to play video games, and I like to read books. So every now and again we swap, and I play a video game that he recommended, and he reads a book that I recommended. We're very much indoors people. Dida96 asks, have you read We Need to Talk About Kevin by Lionel Shriver? No, I have not read that. Muka Hate Angry Humans asks, what do you think about Russia in my city right now? I don't really have a strong opinion about Russia. I've never been there. Hopefully, post-COVID, maybe I'll have the chance to travel there one day. But I don't really have strong emotions about Russia. It's a huge country, so I'm sure it's very diverse in terms of landscape and people. Bill says, we went to the pub with a load of people once. It was awful. Yes, as you can tell, we're both quite introverted. I'm going to pick some more questions from yesterday. Luna guest asked, who are your favorite and least favorite Harry Potter characters? So I have a cat named Minerva, and that is no coincidence, because Professor McGonagall, aka Minerva McGonagall, is my favorite ever Harry Potter character, and I very much aspire to be her, including the turning into a cat part. Least favorite Harry Potter characters, I mean, there's a few that are kind of, wait, what's the point of them? Grob comes to mind. Do you have favorite fantasy books other than Harry Potter? Favorite young adult? Favorite fantasy books. So my all-time favorites, I guess young adult, I think it's technically middle grade. Series is the Magician's House series by William Collett, which is a fantasy. I think that's probably the one. I read fantasy occasionally. I quite enjoyed the Book of the Ancestors trilogy. I say trilogy, but I haven't actually read the last one of those, which is a young adult fantasy series. Favorite young adults. I used to really like Scott Westerfeld. I haven't read any of his newer stuff though. I pick up young adult novels here or there. I'm kind of less keen to commit myself to series, so when I pick one, I pick a standalone novel. Marcus Zusak is an author whose young adult books I've quite enjoyed. And then she also asked, have you read any Alexandre Dumas? Not yet, but he is a classics author that I will definitely explore eventually. In the chat, there have been a few more questions. Jacqueline says, have you ever played a card game called Gloom? I have not, but yeah, we'll check it out. We're kind of looking for more games to play while in isolation. And Dida96 says, if you could give life to one book character, who would it be and why? Oh, you mean like out of the entire history of literature? If I could bring one character to life? Oh, that's a really difficult question. I think it would have to be an owl named Jasper from the book series I just mentioned, the Magician's House series. He's a very clever owl, and he talks, so I would pick him. I'd obviously have to keep him away from my cat because she would eat him. Angela has a good question. In the US, we were assigned certain US novels in school during our teens. They're books nearly everyone has read in school. What German books are ones that most Germans have likely read? I completely messed up the words in that question, but I think we get the gist. Faust by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe is probably the one book that most Germans will have either read, seen, quoted from, or heard of. It's probably the single most famous work of German classic literature. And I too read it in school. And I reread it a few years ago. It's good. I mean, it's a play. A lot of German classics are plays rather than novels, but that would be the number one most famous German classic, I would say. From yesterday's questions, Justin Reader asked, have you read any Kurt Vonnegut or Toni Morrison, and or who is your favorite American author? I've not read those two authors, not because I have a particular feeling about them, but just because I haven't gotten to them yet. They're both on my to-read list. My favorite American author would probably be Octavia E. Butler. I have so far only read two of her novels, Kindred and the dystopian one, The Parable of the Sower. And I loved both of them. Parable of the Sower properly blew me away. So she is an American author where I want to really read every single word she has written, because the two books that I've read by her were just amazing. Teresa says she recommends The Inkwell by Cornelia Funke. Yes, I would recommend that as well. The German title is Tintenherz. It's part of a trilogy, and Inkheart is the first book in English. Yes, Inkheart is very, very good. I really loved reading that. I read it when I was 12, but I reread it recently as an adult and still loved it just as much. The rest of the trilogy I didn't like quite as much, but it's still a really good fantasy, German middle grade fantasy novel. Peshra asked, how about Dan Brown's novels? I like them. I've not read any Dan Brown yet, so I don't have any opinion on his novels, I'm afraid. Ooh, I've lost my questions here. Jacqueline, who's also in the chat, but she also submitted some questions yesterday. So she asked, how do you manage to keep up with reading, hobbies, YouTube, and your PhD? I think I've partly answered that. I don't read as much as other booktubers read. In terms of hobbies, again, I don't really do that much. I do a bit of knitting and crocheting, which I do in the evening in front of the television. And my YouTube, because I've done this for almost 3 years now, my YouTubing process is quite streamlined, and it doesn't require as much effort as it did when I started with my channel. She also asked, in relation to books, what were your favorite childhood books? So I've already mentioned the Magician's House series. That really is my favorite kids' books. More specifically, what was the book, author, or series that hooked you and made you a keen reader? I have been a keen reader since I started reading, and I learned to read quite young, before I started primary school. So I've always kind of read children's books, age-appropriate books. But I think the first book series that made me really hooked on reading was probably Enid Blyton's St. Clair novels. They're a series of, I think, 6 original novels set in a girls' boarding school. It was written during the, I want to say, 1940s. But they were really popular in Germany in the 1960s. In fact, they were so popular that a lot of German authors started adding to the series and writing books in original German to add to this translated boarding school series. But I really loved them, and I read every single one of them. And I think Enid Blyton is the first author where I remember actually noticing the author name and looking out for those books. And it's a bit of a weird thing to read for someone who grew up in the 90s, to read a book series that was popular in the 60s. But I got most of my books at that time from my mum's friends who were from that generation. So I think my taste in children's books is quite old-fashioned because of that. Dido96 asked, did you read all Robert Galbraith's, aka J.K. Rowling's crime books? Did you like them? Yes, I read all 4 of them. I enjoyed all 4 of them. I've done a few videos on my channel about them. So if you search for Robert Galbraith, you'll find my reviews and videos about them. I am not the biggest fan of crime fiction, but I think the Robert Galbraith books are crime fiction done really well. And Teresa asked, have you read Blake Crouch? I have not. In fact, I haven't even heard of Blake Crouch. Is that a contemporary author or classic? Because I don't know who that is, sorry. So that was actually the last question from yesterday's video. And we are now 40 minutes into this. So unless there are any sort of last minute questions, I think we're going to leave it at that. Thank you all for joining me. I did this live stream, by the way, because Spencer's Library just hit 5,000 subscribers, which is amazing. It's a lot of people. It's a kind of scary amount of people, but I'm really grateful for you for subscribing and for making this hobby a really big part of my life and something I really enjoy doing. So, oh, Bill Hayes says, do you have an online shop? You know what, Bill? I actually do. In fact, look at this. Look at this Sherlock Holmes themed jumper I'm wearing today. Yeah, it's shop.spencerslibrary.com if you're interested in cats and classic literature. I'm afraid you have to be interested in cats and classic literature to, you know, enjoy the stuff in the shop. But if you are, then you're in luck. So thanks, Bill, for that reminder. Jacqueline says the Sinclair's books were wonderful. Yes. And she also mentions Mallory Towers, which really I haven't yet read, but there's no question that I am going to catch up on all of Enid Blyton's other boarding school series. I believe she wrote quite a few. Right. We'll leave it at that. Oh, hang on. Did someone ask for Minerva? What are the cats doing? Right. Okay. I think we have to get the cats up here. So I am prepared with a box of Dreamies. However, if Minerva is hanging out with Bill, it might be tricky to get her up here because he is her favorite person in the world. Let's see. Beetle. Hello. Right, one cat is here. He's clearly just woken up. Hello. There's Beetle. He likes his treats, so of course he came running straight away. Beetle. There you go. Yeah, that's right. Show him on your bum. And then he got scared because there was a noise from downstairs. Oh, Angela says, any more videos with guest Spencer Robin coming up soon? Yes, as soon as we are allowed to meet up again. We really, really miss doing videos together. And as soon as the lockdown is over and we can safely meet, there will be more videos with Robin. I don't think Minerva is interested in showing up. So, but she's clearly doing well as well, probably getting lots of attention from Bill. You sneaky little thing. Beetle just went straight for the box of Dreamies. Anyway, I will leave it at that before this descends into some cat chaos. Thank you so much for watching and thank you for joining me. And I hope that you're all there when I next do a live stream, which who knows when that's going to be. But I really enjoyed hanging out with you and I hope you had a good time as well. Say bye, Beetle. Bye.